Pagi semuanya. Pagi hari ini kita akan mengadakan seminar sesuai dengan topik mata kuliah negara dan masyarakat sipil. Tapi seminar ini terbuka bagi teman-teman atau rekan-rekan mahasiswa yang mengambil mata kuliah lain juga diperbolehkan mengikutinya. Karena pagi hari ini kita akan mendengarkan paparan dari Profesor Olle Tornquist. Ya, Profesor Olle ini selama 40 tahun terakhir melakukan kajian, penelitian, khususnya di Indonesia, Filipina, dan India. Dan beliau melihat bagaimana relasi pasang surut, naik turun dari gerakan masyarakat sipil dalam upayanya untuk mentransformasi negara menjadi lebih humanis, menjadi lebih adil, menjadi lebih setara, dan seterusnya dan seterusnya. Pagi hari ini Olle akan memberikan pandangannya. Beberapa pandangan ini berdasarkan pergulatan Olle bersama para aktivis yang ada dalam bahasa beliau di Global South, khususnya di 3 negara tersebut, dan melihat bagaimana jatuh bangun gerakan masyarakat sipil di Indonesia, di Filipina, dan di India dalam mencoba membuat negara menjadi lebih baik. Oke. Language of instruction, bahasa yang akan digunakan pada pertemuan kali ini atau pada seminar pada pagi ini adalah bahasa Inggris. Ya. Tadi saya sudah minta Profesor Olle untuk berbicara dengan tempo yang pelan, so please do not speak too fast, but please loud enough so that they can hear you, both in this room and in the online.
Okay, but you have to tell me if is this okay? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, fine.
Okay, so the floor is now yours now.
Yeah. My bahasa is miserable. I'm so sorry. And it's really crazy because I've been working on Indonesia for almost 50 years. So but don't take it personal. It's about my laziness and my inability to pick up language and figures. Did you mention that I'm also trying to compare a little bit on Scandinavia?
Not yet.
No. So what I'm saying now is also going to be based on comparison with the North, and my main case is Scandinavia, and in particular my country of birth and where I live, which is Sweden. I have worked for 23 years also in Norway. I live close to the border between Norway and Sweden and commute. I used to commute for 23 years. It's not fun, I tell you. Avoid commuting. What I would like to do now is to reflect a little bit on the relations between state and civil society, and draw a little bit on experiences from research in these different contexts. So could we go to the second slide, please? Yeah. So I want to go through some few examples of why the very relations between state and civil society, the very links between civil society and state are crucial. It's very common to talk about, state on the one hand and civil society on the other, but there is less research and less studies being made of the very relations between them, the links between them. And I want to give you a few examples, want to mention a few examples of how important these links are. And I want to start in China, where as you may know, during the great chairman, Mao Zedong, they relied very much on local development and local communities and so-called people's communes. And that was a policy from the Civil War and from the time going on. But then they had a problem, because these communes were like cells, and there were difficulties on linking them. Huh? So there is an American and British scholar called Vivian Hsu, who has written together with Joel Migdal, which is on your curriculum. And sorry, Vivian Hsu has written a very fine essay on what she calls the cellularization, the division, the fragmentation of cells of such local or such people's communes in China, and how the Communist Party and everyone failed to link these communes. And the party did also fail to link them up, even though it was so very authoritarian and totalitarian. So what was the solution? Well, it was not a very good solution. Huh? It was Deng Xiaoping's idea that we need to use the market. Huh? So that is when, you know, the market, the idea of state-dominated market policies developed in China, because they were unable to have a good relation between what you could call state and civil society. They couldn't link these, they couldn't link central government with the various cells and the various supposedly citizens in the local, in the supposedly people's communes. And that's really when China turned, you know, this odd combination of very, very centralized communist leadership and market-driven development. The fully blossomed today, and which really does have its serious problems, I would say. Okay, that's one example. Another example may be from your own context. You know, so many civil society organizations, NGOs, and so on, who are short of connections with state, with politics. So that is partly because they were marginalized in the process of democratization here, but it is also because of their own priorities and so on. And this is, of course, making it extremely difficult for civil society groups and citizens themselves to really make a difference in politics. If I take another example, you remember the Arab Spring, right? With the protests in the Middle East and North Africa a number of years ago. It was so promising. We were all happy. Something happened. But there were absolutely no possibilities for them to have an institutionalized discussion with the authorities, with the dominant leaders in those countries. So they were in the streets, they were in the Tahrir Square in Cairo, but there were no possibilities of linking up for them and discuss with the government. There was one exception. The only ones they could go through was the Brotherhood Party, but the Brotherhood Party had its own problems and were not really trusted by many of the people in civil society. There was one partial exception, that was in Tunisia. And why was it in Tunisia? Because there was a trade union movement in Tunisia, which was not the best in the world at all, but at least it existed. And it could partly facilitate discussions with the people in the streets, the people protesting online and in the street, between them and the top leaders, whom you just can't, you just can't kill them off, right? You will have to negotiate with them. You have to discuss with them. So therefore, Tunisia is a partial exception. You can ask, why was it possible for the civil society organizations in Sudan to regularly challenge the military coup plotters? Because they also had some links. They had developed some links and were able to discuss, whereas in other places it has not been the case. So this is a crucial problem for civil society activism. A very positive case recently is from Chile. What happened? Oh, well, anyway, from Chile in South America, Latin America, where student protests, student leaders managed to broaden their alliances, managed to build up not just their own activism, but also political organizations and build broad fronts. And now they are in government. We have a 35-year-old president in Chile with a background in the student movement. It's remarkable. Then you have the problems of lobbyism and, you know, if you go around and ask civil society organizations in Indonesia what they are giving priority to, it's lobbying. Activism in the streets and lobbying. And in a way, it's okay, you can do that, but it's very limited. You don't have any social base for that, any links with a broader society. It's like, it's a kind of elitist criticism, right? And it relies very much on what partly used to be called social capital. I don't know, is that in your curriculum about social capital? Okay, so there are many discussions about social capital, what it means, right? But I think that we basically has to do with the meaning of good relations, meaning you have good connections. You are what is it, connected, and that is quite privileged. So you need to develop that, and then it's getting into that's a power, that's a very important source of power, but you can't involve in mass democratic politics by just having that. So you need to broaden that again, otherwise you get isolated. Another thing which we might, I don't know, are you also taking this class on same people about local politics?
No, it's different.
Different, okay, all right. So another thing which is example is about, you know, the participation on local level, whether that affects national politics. Let me take one little example, which we all, I think, were very attracted by. You know, the participatory budgeting in Brazil. I don't know if you've heard of it, but you know, it started in a city in the south of Brazil called Porto Alegre, where there was a progressive government in the city of Porto Alegre, and they decided to support people's participation in local budgeting, to make the priorities in local budgeting. And this spread to other cities in Brazil and was very crucial in the development of a popular political agenda and to build up the support for the President Lula once upon a time, who was the leader of a Labour Party, right? Then, you know, there were Lula and the others get elected and they get into government in Brasilia, in the capital city, and they have to compromise, and they find themselves in the situation that they have to provide small little envelopes, you know them from your own country, to politicians in the parliament to get their support for the Labour Party proposals. So they developed, even within the Labour Party, they developed a habit of paying off, or being corrupt, to get political support. Now, who would control this? Well, the problem is that the popular organization, including this participatory government budgeting on the local level, they didn't have any chance to affect and control the politics in Brasilia, in the capital. So again, the problem of linking this popular participation, civil society participation, and state and organized politics. And when they didn't have that chance, it paved the way for the right-wing opposition. And Bolsonaro came to power in Brazil. Another aspect of the state-civil society relations is about direct democracy, a very vital aspect of what we call populism. We are not going to go into a definition now of populism, but a vital aspect of populism is the idea of direct democracy, of direct links between the leaders and the population. And the mediation there between these two is sort of played down, because it's part of the populist agenda to say the leader should have direct contact with the people. No, Jokowi making his, what is it called, Blueslukan or something? Huh? Yeah, his visits like that among people. Of course, it's just a margin. It's just symbols. He's just symbolizing that he listens to people. When he was building up support in Oslo once upon a time, when it started in the early 2000s, there were negotiations between the civil society groups who supported popular organizations among the urban poor and petty traders, everything from organizations of prostitutes to scavengers and whatnot. And that was facilitated, and Jokowi was trying at the time to modernize Solo. He wanted to change the structure of the city, clean it up. He wanted to have a plaza instead of a very dirty market, and so on and so forth. So he was saying to people, you better move from here because we need to modernize the city and promote development. And they say, no, we won't do that. You will have to see to it that we get better alternatives. And there was a stalemate. And these local organizations were clever enough to stage demonstrations around the 20 August, the Independence Day. So, and Jokowi wanted to have a celebration in the main square, but the peddlers, the traders, and others said, no, we're going to occupy the square. You can't have your fine celebration there. So then he had to agree to a compromise, and then there were negotiations going on in various cafes and small tea shops and so on between these organizations and Jokowi. And that's fine. They talk to each other. Good, fine. But it was not formalized. It was not, there were no institutions to carry on to make it firm. So, when Jokowi is then attracted to go to Jakarta and become the mayor in Jakarta, governor of Jakarta, it all fell down because Rudy, he's a bit rude actually, but Rudy took over and he didn't mind about these things, and it wasn't institutionalized, so just crumbled. And we have the same problem with discussions in Jakarta later on, between various organizations and so on. We'll come back to that some other time. And of course, you have clientelism, when the relations between civil society and the state is facilitated by patrons. I forgot to put here the old and very crucial link, which I would call indirect rule, which is the remnant from the colonial past. So make a note of that, which is, of course, that, you know, you have a very big, you have a kind of colonial state-like structure. You have a big leader, and to control people, you work your way through traditional elites, traditional leaders. So there is the mediation is with religious organizations, ethnic organizations, local strongmen, warlords, etc. That was how the Dutch was ruling Indonesia. That's how the British were ruling India. So that meant that ordinary people did not have their own citizenship, and they did not create the mediating organization, because the mediating organizations were these religious organizations, these ethnic groups, these strongmen. Now, that is occasionally attempted at continuously, even after independence, right? This kind of trying to reach out to people by through organizations which are not created by people themselves. So we will have to keep that in mind. Okay, now can we take the next slide, please? This is a figure that I made a copy of yesterday from a book, which you can, if you go to my personal homepage, you can, what do you call it? You can download, you can illegally kind of bypass it all and download. There is a copy in my homepage. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, the book is there, one way or the other. Don't buy it because it's well, there is a paperback edition these days, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, so there is a figure there where I just try to illustrate where we are in terms of representation, because the state-civil society relations may be viewed to a large extent in terms of representation. Of course, it is, before we turn to representation, of course, it's also about state public administration. But to a large extent, it is about representation. And if we look at this picture or this figure, I think I'm trying to summarize what the main problem is. You have on top, you have increasingly weak state and public governance. Both in countries like Sweden and here, much of it is kind of privatized or semi-privatized. So it's getting weaker, and it's also affected by corruption, informal relations, and so on. You have then a link in the straight down, where it's about autonomous political links between state people. That between demos in the demos people in below. These autonomous links, like popular organizations, mass-based political parties, which people themselves have formed, and so on, they are quite weak. You have this situation quite clearly in Indonesia, right, where the parties are very much elitist constructions who are just capture votes. You even have a situation where you hardly have any there isn't any representation for a really political alternative form by people. But you have strengthened business and market forces that link popular governance and demos. They take more attention, and you have strengthened communal and patronage networks there. This is to illustrate just where we are in terms of democratic links between state and civil society. If we talk in terms of democratic links between state and civil society. If we then turn to the next slide, please. Now, this is a figure which people are sort of, making fun of me and say it looks like a nuclear power station or something. But it's an attempt to, in one single figure, capture the essence of what representation is about. Okay, and representation, now we talk about more or less democratic representation. So you see the definition of democratic representation to the left. It's about politically equal policy making, a kind of input, and an impartial implementation of decisions, non-corrupt, impartial implementation, and policy making based on political equality, meaning everyone has one vote, kind of. Everyone are supposed to be equal in that process. There is an authorization with a mandate, meaning that you have select your representatives that are given a mandate to act. And there is accountability and transparency and responsiveness on the part of the agent, of those whom we give a mandate. That's the essence of democratic representation. Then on top of this nuclear power station, on top of this figure, you have the public affairs. That's what we are. That's the state level of public affairs, right? So that we may define in terms of saying that it's a matter of common concern. We think this is nothing just personal. This is something we need to do together, which may be governed in more or less public ways. Because what we have in common, what we need to take care of is not necessarily handled publicly, but in this case, it relates to public ways of handling our common interests, our common matters. Now that can be done in various ways, right? So if you look at the picture to the right, we have what we call institutions for public government. That is what we normally study in political science. Civil and military administration. It's about the judiciary and the police. And it's about the political executives and the political legislatives, the parliament and so on various levels. Yeah, thank you. But states, the public affairs are not just governed. In reality, are not just governed by public government. We have to acknowledge that a lot of things are governed in other way but by the government. So there are institutions for private governance of what we have in common, right? There are institutions for civil self-government, cooperatives and that kind of thing, self-managed residential areas or what it may be. Yeah. And you have auxiliary state institutions where there are both representatives from the public and from civil society. Can you come to think of anything? Well, let's take Kommunas Hamn, for instance, where the government is sort of setting the rule for appointing people, but where there are also kind of representatives from civil society. And then you have institutions for participation and representation at all levels and in all society. That means various, we are going to come back to that box later on, but this may be related to consultations, dialogues, negotiations of various kinds, and this may be organized informally or formally. And of course, it's better for democracy if it's formalized, because then you can keep people accountable and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's on that level. Now, then you have representation there, because on the below in the figure we have people, right? Far below is, oops, sorry, in my own figure here. Far below is the demos, but and I'm sorry it has disappeared from the picture there. But far below we have the ordinary people. They are not included in that picture. I'm sorry, I missed them out. But below there is the picture. Now the question is, how is the mediation between the people down in the bottom and these institutions for public governance? Well, you can have three sort of mediating organizations, right? You can have civil society organization. That is when you have kind of self-management of things. So people are represented in, for instance, a residential organization or something, by they appoint people there and take care of their own matters. It may also be activists who are lobbying and so on. So, and you have the political society. On the one hand, you have the political parties. You can also have organizations which are related, political movements that are mediating, right? And all these organizations are supposedly in a democracy elected or appointed by people. And then to the right in that picture, you have the informal leaderships. Could be based on patronage, good contacts, social capital, kinship, religion, ethnicity, and that sort of thing. Okay, that's a fact. It's not very democratic, but it's in the actual reality, it exists. Right? And then you have how they relate to representation to the demos. It may be symbolic representation, like, you know, Sukarno was a symbolic political leader, kind of. I'm the mouthpiece of the people, he used to say. You can have descriptive representation. That means you stand for a territory, a community group, a certain part of the population. Women represent women, and that sort of thing. And you can have a substantive representation. That is when you act for views, policies, and interests. And this, and below, please add, remember, in the low part of the figure, there should be the people, the demos. And of course, the question is also whether these people are active themselves, whether they are equal as citizens, and so on and so forth. This is the complicated picture. Let me ask one question. When democratization was promoted in Indonesia by the democracy movement, but also by international donors and activists, what aspects in this picture was considered? Was it center of the discussion? Did they discuss how to promote representation? Did they discuss the pros and cons of various ways of doing this, of promoting this, and so on? And I would argue that very few aspects of it were discussed and considered. It was primarily the electoral factor and the civil society kind of watchdog and lobbying that was considered. All the other vital aspects of representation were neglected. And that, I would argue, is a very main factor for why we couldn't use the process of democratization as it was framed to really promote governance in the country, and not just in Indonesia, in so many other countries. Let me turn now to two parts, or two or three parts in this figure. Are we going to have a break, or are you making this in one go?
Yeah, just
one go. Okay. 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 So I'm going to bring up a few aspects of this figure, which I want to concentrate on. They relate to the kind of reforms that may be brought up and represented, and how one can do that, and how the importance of representation and links between civil society and state in that process. So then we are going to talk about the box there with institution for participation and representation on the top, and the mediation between them, right? Between the mediation between such institutions and the people on the ground. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a bit about what we used to call transformative reforms, and what we also may call partnership governance. Now, let me first talk about transformative reforms, because in policy making, you put forward various demands. The civil society may put forward various demands, and trade unions, but also business organizations and many other things. They put forward various demands, and you can have reforms, policy reforms. But the the problems here relate to what kind of reforms one suggests. If you want to change and transform society by reforms, and not just revolutions or coups d'etats or linking up with authoritarian political leaders and so on. But if you want to transform it by a process of democratic reforms, you need to consider how reforms are constructed. You can do this by way of representation, but the reforms themselves are crucial. And one example of this, which I used to take, is the public health reform in Indonesia, leading up to the BPJS. That was a very impressive. It was not implemented. It was made real. It was supported and made real by a broad alliance of politicians from various parties, by trade unions, civil society organizations, and so on. Agitating for it and trying to polish the proposal that was designed by politicians and administrators and intellectuals, think tanks, and so on and so forth. Now, and that was good, and it was it was decided, and something happened. But if continue, if you wanted really to transform society, you would have to add additional reforms based on this one. So those who gain strength, bargaining power by way of this reform, the actors themselves, the civil society groups, the trade unions, the politicians there, but also the people who benefited from the this public health reform, so that they could use their increasing capacity to put forward additional reform proposals and move ahead. And that was not made. So all the actors, the trade unions, the civil society organizations, the politicians, returned to their specific fragmented agendas and gave priority to their specific demands. So for instance, the trade unions went back to their basic ideas, and some of them even linked up in 2014 with a presidential candidate that was not necessarily very supportive of popular movements, Prabhu. And others joined other political leaders and were horse trading with them. And NGOs and civil society organizations returned to their very specific agenda. So that was the end of it. But if I take another more positive example of what transformative reforms can achieve, I would like to return to Scandinavia, not to glorify Scandinavia in any way, but there are some good examples. And the best example is, I think, what we call, with a rather derogative term, sometimes we call state feminism, meaning state-promoted gender equality. So the implication is that our women didn't do it themselves, it was done by the state. But that's wrong, because what happened was that there were, if you go back in time, there were strong women's organizations first involved in claiming the right to vote. That was in the 1910s and 1920s. Women only got the right to vote in Sweden in 1921. And the reason for, the reason I'm not going to, but what made it possible was a lot of women organizing in favor of it. They managed to change the priorities of the liberal parties and the Social Democratic Party, and they had demonstrations and so on and so forth. Okay, they got the right to vote. So now we have that. And that gave them more possibilities, of course, in parliament, in the public arena, and so on. So additional reforms were then demanded, like equal work relations, equal to what was applying to men in their workplaces, or similar at least. So you had big organizations of home workers, people serving in the homes of the elite. They demanded regulated work hours, and so on and so forth. And there were legislations, there were reforms made to facilitate that, and it continued with, they gained strength, they demanded reforms, they put forward demands to the employers, not just to the state, also to the employed, and they gained strength. And where are we to? And it's a step, it's a staircase, you could say, where one reform paved the way for the next reform, facilitated the strength of these women. And where we are today is with a fairly gender equal society, where women are taking over more and more positions, where the women are the best students, no doubt, in universities, where they are getting into work life in all sectors, I would say. We have pilots, we have women in the military, we have women being prime ministers, and so on and so forth. It's an enormous difference in, around 50, 60 years or something, but it has really changed, and not just for women, right? Because this has made a difference for children, because it's better to have them in the kindergartens where they learn to play without bullying each other and so on. It has improved education of women and people in general. It has improved growth in society because more women are out in working life, and it has changed the males. We are less chauvinist now and do part of the housework and so on and so forth. And it's good for the men as well. So this is really a success case. And that is due to this kind of transformative reforms in that field. You can think these kind of reforms in other sectors as well. Of course, you need to develop such reforms in different contexts and so on and so forth. But I'm just saying the logic of it. Now, it's just not about, how am I doing in time? Okay. It's not just about these kind of reforms, transformative reforms. It's also about what I used to call partnership governance. Because, if you shall if you shall promote change through the state, through public administration and through government, through state, and partially being implemented by the public administration, then you are you don't necessarily give up your own cooperatives, your own self-help organizations and that sort of thing, but you try to work through the state to quite an extent, through public government. And then, of course, you must see to it that that government works. You must have some control of it. It must be accountable. It can't be captured by the military or by any oligarchs or dominant political parties and so on and so forth. So you have to find a way of doing that. Otherwise, you won't trust it. And one way of doing that is to try to draw up forms, frameworks, institutions for popular for organizations that are how shall we say, that have what is this word for it, where they are anyway, where they have a stake, stakeholders. I don't like that word, but anyway, they have a stake in the policies. They are affected by it, they have promoted it, and so on. So possibilities for them to take part in the designing of the policies. It's not just for them to get their interests taken care of, it's also to contribute good ideas. So if there would be a labor legislation, for instance, it's of course very good if the trade unions are represented, because they know quite a lot of this. It's also good if those who have not formal employment, but are in the informal sector, one way or the other can be represented in the drafting of the proposal. And it's also good if academicians with some expertise in this can participate, right? And so this is in drafting the proposals, and this needs to be democratically. It can be done in various ways. A common way of doing that, unfortunately, that the politicians are picking their own favorite representatives, right? So they say, so I talk to him, or I know this and that organization for informal labor, and I talk with them. and so on and so forth. You pick up your reference groups and so on and so forth. And I know these scholars I drawn there. That is, of course, not very democratic, right? And it's problematic. You can also do it in a more or less sort of, how shall I say, corporatist way, like the fascists, like Mussolini and the others did. That is that you have corporations of various sectors in society, and then these groups are selected, and they are appointed, they are designed, and people are selected by a leader, a top leader or top leaders. So it's top-down definition and selection of people. That's a kind of statist corporatism. That's what you had during guided democracy in Indonesia. It was even worse, of course, during Suharto. But there are also other ways of doing this, where the popular organizations, the interest organizations, come together and select their own leaders. And okay, the state is providing the framework where people can meet, where they can talk to each other, where they can talk to the state, but the organizations themselves put forward their representatives, and these representatives are accountable to the organizations. They are not accountable to the political leaders. That's what we developed in Scandinavia for many years, and that is one form of partnership governance. American scholars used to call it social corporatism in contrast to state corporatism. Now, where do you sit and talk about this? Well, it depends on the sector. If it's about drafting a law, there may be a committee to prepare the law. And then it's not just politicians in that committee. There are also representatives of the most important concerned interest organizations. If the law concerns environmental matters, there may also be civil society organizations concerned with environmental causes. If it concerns gender equality, there may be women's organizations. Now, when these committees are put forward their proposals to the government, to the parliament, and so on, this means that those proposals have been anchored, as we would say in Scandinavia, you would say socialized in a broader society. But before it is turned into a law or a proposition, it is usually sent out for broader hearing. So everyone with a stake in that matter will have the possibility of organization and so on to give their opinions about it. So I think this is wrong, you should do it this way and that way. Finally, the proposal is decided. Now, there may also be decisions made by the government itself, by the cabinet and the prime minister in our case. It's not taken to the parliament, so it's decided, just like Jokowi makes some decisions without going to the parliament. And then there is a process of consultation. We have these public hearings and so on and so forth. That was very instrumental earlier. It's less now, but it was instrumental and very, very important for, the acceptance, the trust in public reforms and in public governance. Then it's the question of implementation. Right? So when it's going to be implemented, there are also representatives involved in this. In various public agencies, there would be representatives of some concerned interest group, not just politicians and others, to keep an eye on it. So keep the others accountable, come forward with some ideas and so on. Now, then of course there is horizontal accountability between rules and regulations for what bureaucrats are supposed to do and not do and all of that, and what academicians are supposed to do and not do. We have our academic freedom and all of that. But there is some kind of representation all the time by civil society, by interest groups in a lot of the public policy making and implementation. The most complicated part of this relates to agricultural support and agricultural policy and support for labor and so on. It's so complicated that hardly anyone outside that understand how the support system works and how the accountability is organized. But one thing is sure, the government can't make their decisions on this without consulting the farmers' cooperative organizations and so on. There would be a revolution if it didn't take place. So anyway, this has been important. It's not the only reason for why we are not having so much corruption, but it has been important in creating trust in public governance. You don't have to do things that are on common concern can be handled together by our own public institution. We don't have to turn it into private. If we want a public health reform, if we need an insurance, if we need security when we get ill, we rather prefer to do it together through the public sector than take a private insurance, to put it simply, because we still trust in it. It's getting undermined in Scandinavia due to the neoliberal policies, the so-called new public management, where a lot of things are being privatized. But these days, and I would say in particular after we saw a lot of weaknesses related to how to handle the COVID-19, the importance of having good public health, the importance of having good connections between central, local, and central, regional, and local public health administration, the importance of having regulation of private hospitals and private homes for the elderly, and so on and so forth. This became very, very obvious with the pandemic. So I think there is a little bit of return to these, to the concerns for representation in public administration. The linkages, the institutionalized linkages between state and civil society. Did I have anything more to say? No, I think that's it. So, is it okay, Luki? Can we round up there and try to discuss, try to bring up other important issues or related important issues that I didn't mention because I forgot about them, and which may come up in a discussion and a question and answer session. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Tornquist, for your fabulous presentation. It is eye-opening presentation, especially I think this is probably the first seminar that we conducted after 2 years of pandemic. So we are able to gather this much of crowd, both students and lecturers. Okay, before we continue to the question and answer session, let me summarize what we have in bahasa. Ya. Oke, teman-teman semua, tadi Profesor Tornquist sudah menjelaskan beberapa aspek, ya. Saya mengkategorikannya dalam beberapa poin. Poin pertama adalah mengenai tipe-tipe atau jenis relasi antara masyarakat atau civil society dan negara. Banyak contoh yang dia gunakan mulai dari China, Indonesia, Tunisia, negara-negara Skandinavia, dan beberapa contoh di belahan dunia lainnya. Contoh-contoh tersebut bisa kita lihat sebagai model bagaimana relasi itu berjalan, bagaimana dinamika di dalam relasi tersebut, dan kira-kira seperti apa hasil yang diperoleh dari model-model atau jenis-jenis tipologi dari relasi tersebut. Oke. Relasinya ada yang baik, ada yang kuat, menguatkan antara masyarakat sipil dan negara, tapi juga ada relasinya yang seperti kalau kalian punya akun Facebook, Kang Danis, Mbak Ayu pasti punya akun Facebook, itu selalu ada istilah relationship-nya it's complicated, ya. Tidak semua relasi berjalan dengan mulus, ya. Ada kalanya yang tidak mulus, ada kalanya yang berkerikil, bergerombang dan seterusnya. Ya, seperti orang juga relasi, ya, putus nyambung gitu ya. Ada yang lancar, ada yang ya begitu. Oke. Jangan garu-garu kepala, Mas. Walaupun Anda jomblo, jangan putus asa. Oke. Kemudian poin kedua, Olle mengatakan mengenai type of representation. Ada 3 yang dia gambarkan, ada yang simbolik, ya, utamanya bertumpu pada kepemimpinan yang karismatik, seperti Soekarno yang dia contohkan tadi. Soekarno dengan apa namanya slogannya penyambung lidah rakyat, ya. Lidah banyak orang dia sambungkan gitu, dan dia wujudkan dalam bentuk, ya, program atau agenda politik yang dia bangun. Tapi juga ada simbolik melalui tokoh-tokoh adat, tokoh etnik, tokoh agama. Yang kedua adalah representasi deskriptif yang berdasarkan teritorial, berdasarkan komunal gitu ya. Dan ini terjadi di Indonesia, misalkan contohnya suatu daerah ada masyarakat adatnya dan mereka ingin ada representasinya. Dan yang terakhir adalah substantif, ya, yang biasa kita temui, kita jumpai, kita lihat dalam masyarakat atau politik yang modern melalui anggota parlemen, misalkan representasi itu berjalan. Poin ketiga yang dikatakan oleh Olle adalah relasi antara masyarakat dengan negara seringkali juga harus berhadapan dengan relasi lain, ya, antara negara dan kapital, ya. Dan relasi ini juga mempunyai kedekatan, mempunyai derajat intimacy yang mungkin dan biasanya di banyak negara-negara justru lebih kuat dibandingkan dengan relasi antara negara dan masyarakat sipil, terutama pada masa menguatnya kapitalisme, menguatnya ekonomi pasar bebas, ya, di mana kemudian relasi antara negara dan kapital justru menjadi dominan. Ya, tantangannya, kata Olle, adalah bagaimana dismantling, apa bahasa Indonesianya, Bu Ayu, merombak, ya, atau taming itu menjinakkan, atau bahkan mentransformasi kapitalisme, ya, menjadi kapitalisme yang lebih humanis, yang lebih pro lingkungan misalkan. Oke. Nah, poin ketiga yang Olle katakan, atau keempat adalah transformative reform, dan dia banyak menggunakan contoh-contoh dari Skandinavia, terutama dari Swedia, negara asalnya dia, di mana reformasi untuk mengubah negara bisa terjadi jika kemudian kelompok-kelompok di dalam masyarakat sipil terlibat aktif dan berinteraksi secara terbuka, ya, menggunakan saluran-saluran representasi yang diakui. Ya. Contoh yang dia gunakan adalah bagaimana serikat-serikat buruh mempunyai representasi orang-orang yang mereka percayakan untuk bernegosiasi dengan pihak pemerintah, ya, untuk mendapatkan kondisi yang baik untuk misalkan angkatan kerja, untuk bagaimana lingkungan kerja dan seterusnya. Satu contoh yang menurut Olle berhasil terjadi di Skandinavia, apa yang dia sebut sebagai feminization of the state, ya, through the state, di mana ada pemberian hak kepada kaum perempuan, hak untuk memperoleh pendidikan, hak untuk bekerja secara equal opportunity, hak untuk mendapatkan persamaan dalam penghargaan, terutama gaji, di mana hal ini justru mendorong pertumbuhan pembangunan di Swedia menjadi lebih baik karena angkatan kerjanya menjadi lebih besar. Ya, tidak hanya laki-laki saja yang kerja, gitu, tapi perempuan juga bisa kerja. Dan menurut Olle, secara statistik terbukti bahwa di Swedia perempuan agak sedikit lebih pintar begitu, di kampus mereka lebih baik nilai akademiknya dibanding laki-laki, karena mungkin laki-lakinya sibuk main game online begitu, perempuannya membaca dan mengerjakan soal-soal dengan baik. Dan dengan demikian, ya, di Swedia mereka punya workforce yang lebih beragam, lebih besar, sehingga bisa mendorong pertumbuhan ekonomi dan pembangunan. Nah, poin terakhir yang Olle katakan adalah bagaimana semua ini, relasi tadi, hubungan tadi, dibuat menjadi terinstitusionalisasi, terlembagakan. Ya, di awal dia mencontohkan banyak tipologi di mana yang dasarnya adalah hubungan atau relasi secara individu melalui kelompok lobby, melalui pertemanan, atau melalui kelompok-kelompok yang mempunyai mempunyai koneksi dengan aparatur atau penyelenggara negara. Apa yang mereka lakukan di Skandinavia adalah melembagakannya, ya, sehingga ya, jelas mekanisme pertanggungjawabannya, jelas agenda atau isu yang mau diadvokasi atau mau diperjuangkan, dan keuntungan atau manfaat dari proses interaksi ini tidak hanya dinikmati oleh segelintir kelompok saja. Ya. Jadi dampaknya negosiasi misalkan antara negara, kelompok kapital, ya, pengusaha, dan serikat buruh dirasakan manfaatnya oleh masyarakat secara umum. Tidak hanya dirasakan manfaatnya oleh kelompok-kelompok tertentu yang hadir di dalam forum konsultasi tersebut. Oke. Mungkin itu ringkasan dari saya terhadap apa yang sudah dijabarkan oleh Profesor Tornquist. Oke, sekarang kita masuk ke sesi tanya jawab. Silakan bagi kawan-kawan yang ada di ruangan ini maupun yang ada di dunia maya di manapun Anda berada itu untuk mengajukan pertanyaan. Pertanyaan boleh dalam bahasa Indonesia, lebih baik lagi dalam bahasa Inggris supaya dia langsung bisa dengarkan, gitu ya. Silakan jika ada yang mau bertanya. 1, ada lagi yang lain? 2, 3, yang belakang. Ada yang mau bertanya, Mbaknya? 1, ya. Itu ada 1. Oke, 4 dulu ya. Silakan, Mas. Nama.
Selamat pagi teman-teman semuanya. Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu dosen, dan selamat pagi Pak Prof Olle. Jadi saya izin bertanya dari topik pembahasan kuliah yang dibawakan oleh Prof. Olle pada hari ini, Fauzan, nama Fauzan. Oke, saya lanjut. Jadi pada hari ini berkaitan dari topik bahasan yang dibawa oleh Prof. Olle itu sendiri yang berkaitan dengan state dan civil society. Di sini saya tertarik dengan bahwa sebenarnya tujuan dari gerakan-gerakan sosial yang terjadi di Indonesia ini pada dasarnya untuk mentransformasikan social grievance dan social discontent yang tengah beredar di pusaran publik. Tetapi yang kita ketahui bersama bahwa kenyataannya pada hari ini seperti yang disebutkan juga oleh Prof. Olle dan dijelaskan juga tadi oleh Prof. Bapak Luki, bahwa adanya the problems of lobby gitu dalam praktek gerakannya, di mana sebenarnya tidak ada transparansi dan itikat baik dalam suatu lobby, dan lobby yang terjadi itu terlalu terfokus pada tuntutan patron atau klientelisme yang terjadi. Nah, jadi gerakan yang terjadi ini kebanyakan mayoritas hanya untuk berkompromi saja, bukan bertujuan untuk mengubah atau mengkritisi kebijakan yang bermasalah. Lalu di sini poinnya adalah bagaimana sih Pak merubah bentuk-bentuk seperti itu dalam gerakan-gerakan sosial. Karena yang saya tahu dan saya dapatkan juga ada pepatah yang berkata bahwa jalan menuju neraka itu sebenarnya telah disediakan dengan rencana-rencana baik. Dan terakhir, lalu bagaimana kita merubah gerakan yang bersifat simbolik representatif menuju substantif representation. Terima kasih, Prof.
There are 4 questions, but we should take one by one or just gather all the information.
You know the substance of it.
Oke. Ya, satu, terus yang kedua, Mbak, silakan.
Cek. Kalau Luki minta tolong bantuannya untuk itu, kalau bahasa saya agak rancu sedikit. So good morning everyone. My name is Putri. So this question I have for Professor Olle that about the trade union, before the trade union things. One of the example Indonesian as a state that give the people, facilitate people to speak, to protest online or offline, like demos thing. But in reality, in my opinion, I could say it is just formal things. It's just that the government not really listen what people say. They seems don't care about what's in people's mind or something else that, yeah, they just keep blaming, but I don't understand what you say. Just keep blaming. It's like what the government say. So the question is there something wrong about Indonesian state civil society relation links, or what could I say, and what should or could maybe we do as the people that don't have a huge power like us would needs the government to fit our needs. So what could or should we do as the people?
I get the general message, but I think we need to soften.
Yes. Selanjutnya, silakan Mas.
Good morning, everyone. I want to try to question with English. My name is Afif, Rehan Afif. The question is how to make a good participatory civil society and effective to public policy itself, because the governance have a complex problem is their country, and how to solve problem about political interest from many elements. Thank you.
Yang terakhir apa? How to solve problem?
How to solve a problem about political interest from many elements, because disebutkan tadi ada soalnya soalnya tadi disebutkan bahwa ada kelembagaan sistem lobby apa segala macam, itu kan sebenarnya menurut saya akan memancing untuk kelompok kepentingan semakin lebih marak lagi gitu. Terima kasih.
Mbak yang di belakang, ya, mau nanya tadi? Oh nanti, oke. Mbak Reva yang dari Zoom, apakah ada yang bertanya? Belum ada yang respon? Oke. Lobbying can be done in a non-transparent way, and it's
In a non-transparent.
with this interest. Now, one of the visible feature of linkages is to lobby. Lobby itself could only strengthen a particular interest, especially groups that have strong lobby connection. Okay. Yeah. Those are 3 questions.
Good question. Sorry, good questions. Let's take this lobbying business first. Now, 2 other questions relate to it. Yes, very clear that much of the lobbying is not transparent and you know, basically avoids the democratic principles of transparency, of representation, and so on. And I like to add in this respect that we should be aware that this problem is not at all only in countries like Indonesia. It's very much in Scandinavia and many other countries as well. The European Union, for instance, is in Brussels. You know, it's a heaven for lobby organizations. And so it is a worldwide disease in a way. Of course, this is also related to the idea of, how shall we say, the idea of liberal democracy, that the relation between citizens and state, citizens and government are supposed to be primarily based on elections and government, elected parliaments, and so on and so forth, on the one hand, and on the other hand, of active citizens. And lobbying is, in that view, seen as a logical implication or follow-up of active citizenship. The problem with that notion, that understanding, then is, of course, as you underline both of these, those of you who asked the question, and I'm sure about most of us, that there isn't anything like equal citizenship in reality. I mean, you are all Indonesians, right? And so on. But in terms of capacity among citizens, there are huge variations. Now, how do we get around this? Then the liberal idea of democracy, which is basically fine in so many ways, is often sort of neglecting the efforts of citizens to improve or increase their bargaining power and their capacities by organizing, by forming movements, by collective action. Because in the liberal framework, that tends to produce, no, not promote, but enhance and strengthen special interests. So, yes, it's fine, people build trade unions, or okay, it's good, people form an urban poor coalition, and so on and so forth. But according to the liberal vision, most of these organizations develop leaders that are dominant and foster their own specific interests. So the social democratic vision of democracy, the democratic system says we should build an institutional framework for people's own organizations, not only political parties, but other forms of organization, to take part in politics on different levels and make this by collective action to a larger degree than only strong liberal ideal liberal self-active citizens. But and that's fine on paper as well, but of course it may generate dominant political groups and organizations and all of that. We must be aware of that. Like in South Africa with the ANC dominating so much of the civil society activities these days. Or the left government in West Bengal, sitting in power for many, many years, and turning into a state dominant organization. Finally, there was enough of Indian democracy to facilitate for people who felt fed up with that to vote against that leftist government and get rid of it, punish it. So that kind of competition, this kind of, checks and balances need to be built into the system of collective representation. There must be some kind of competition, and that is within brackets. I would say that is perhaps the main problem in Indonesia today. I don't think that the authoritarian tendencies, which are no doubt there in Indonesia, but I don't think that that is the main problem. The main problem is the lack of organized real opposition, competitive checks and balances in that sense. And that takes us back to the political system, that takes us back to the high thresholds in elections, that takes us back to questions of how can people build parties and popular organizations and make a difference. So, yeah, I cannot say more than with regard to lobbying. I say we have to build alternatives to lobbying, because otherwise, as you said, the implication here, it was mentioned here, then otherwise it's only those of us who have good connections, who can pay off lawyers to be active in lobby groups, or have connections to and form civil and finance civil society organization and so on, that will make a difference. So there is no other shortcut. One has to improve democracy in order to increase the checks and balances and make it easier, better, more possible for ordinary people to build their own organizations and groups. I can't see anything else. But of course, that doesn't mean, I would like to add, that doesn't mean that those of you who sit here, and Luki and me, don't have a role to play in this, because ordinary people haven't got the capacity to sit day out and day in and read books and learn from other experiences and draft proposals and so on and so forth. That's our task, but we need to be embedded among them, and we need to listen to them and cooperate with them and get our ideas polished by, discussing with them. But if we are just isolating ourselves and come forward with our ideas and work through our civil society organizations on our own, then very little will happen, because we don't have a backing. So yeah, I can't say more than that. There is no shortcut, I think. Lobbying, or another way around. Let me an allegory. What do you call it? Compare with another thing. If we complain about privatization of public health, we have to improve public health. because the market is there. If the public health system does not work, people with money will take private insurances. It's only when middle class people realize that they also gain from public health services, that the public health service system will work, because it's those middle class people who can pay taxes and finance the public health system. So they have to be along to build it up. So the same thing. We'll have to improve the public system of representation. Otherwise, it just crumbles, and then we are into a system of democracy which is so limited to those who can make a difference, just as you say, can make a difference by lobbying, through strong men, through populism, and that sort of thing. Yeah, I can't say more than that. So that by saying that, I think I've also tried to answer the question: what does one do to make it more possible for Orange kind of, yeah, weak people? I would, if you wanted to, we need to then sit down and think, okay? It's easy for me to say build organizations and all of that. But, then we need to come back. If we want to build a kind of, make changes that improve their capacity to make a difference. So what would be the most important reform to start with? I think education reforms. it has to be combined, of course, also with you know, some kind of very basic social and economic reforms that make it possible for people, and health reforms that make it possible for people to simply survive and have the time to get some education. But if we make educational reforms, if there are educational, if there are what do you call it? Yeah, educational movements that facilitate popular education. It will, by helping people to get access to have discussions, to learn and very properly read and write, and but really don't just trust public. Don't just trust the computers, what is it, the social media kind of thing. Read books, read articles, learn to read and write, and make a difference. If there are such efforts, such educational movements, people begin to change. And you did this in your nationalist movement. Indonesia was not liberated in the battlefield. What brought Indonesia together was a remarkable effort at popular education and the language, of course. And you know, I mean, you didn't even win in the battlefield when you fought the Dutch in the 40s. Your main effort was to make the society ungovernable. They couldn't govern anymore. You didn't beat them up. Well, there were instances of that, but you didn't win by making war primarily. Yeah, so this educational effort, and that was there during the 50s as well. But it has got lost. Not least in the what do you call it? The disinterest or the lack of public support for getting an understanding of your own history. I don't know any country which is so short of you know, a history, an independent or rather autonomous public understanding of their own history as this country. Of course, there are authoritarian countries, really authoritarian countries, where you have a prescribed version of history. But in more pluralistic countries, Indonesia is quite remarkable because people don't know their history. And I think that's so crucial, you know. So educational movement. Let me just say one thing in this remarkable Southwest Indian state of Kerala. In the 1930s, when they fought the British, when they fought the dominant castes, and where there were, in every village, there were 3 organizations in that popular movement. One was, of course, the peasant organizations. Another was the trade unions. What was the third? A library movement. There were the radical organizations built public libraries. Huh? Activists got into factories, and while people were working, they read novels for them. News. This created an enormous strength that everyone who were active in the movement could read and write and understand what was going on. So I would say that is probably the basic thing to strengthen. Yeah. But I'm not advocating that this should be done by some kind of missionary organizations, or so on. It should be part of the social and economic broad-based movements. Yeah.
Apa perlu diterjemahkan atau sudah cukup jelas apa yang Profesor Tornquist katakan tadi? Ya, cukup ya. Oke. Masih ada yang mau bertanya? Silakan. Berarti Mas Fajar boleh, boleh tolong. Yang lain di belakang ada yang mau bertanya? Ya, satu. Oke. Satu lagi, empat ya.
Good morning, sir, Prof. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Adinda Siamrihi. I want to ask you about gender society. You have explained that women finally get the same opportunities as men. Even in Sweden, research say that women are smarter than men. If the gender equal society is implemented in Indonesia, which is still dominated by the patriarchy, it must be difficult for us. So my question is there a way so that Indonesia can implement that gender equality society without making men feel jealous or insecure of women? That's my question.
Could you, I get the general understanding of what you're saying, but the specific question, can you help me? How can you
advocate for gender equality?
You advocate for it?
That would not harm men. Men would not feel threatened or intimidated by that.
Okay, sir. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me respond directly to that question. This is a very.
Wait.
Okay.
We take three other questions.
Selamat siang, Professor Olle. Thank you. My name is Ati Norbaiti. I'm now a freelance journalist. During this pandemic, of course, it revealed many more of our weaknesses than in normal times. Very quickly, we could see local governments trying hard to issue the best policies and measures as possible. But the president quickly said that major things like a lockdown, they are not your prerogative. Yeah, so that we saw people saw a muddle between the initiative and efforts of local governments compared to the decisions of the president. And amid this muddle, people could not wait. People were dying. People needed medicine and food. And many self-help groups emerged. They could not wait. They just were helped by their neighbors. And at this stage now, as the pandemic has declined a little bit, how do you see the dynamics of state-society relations, which could lead to improved public health system? We have had many new NGOs like Lapor COVID-19, but on the other hand, we have had local governments trying as best as possible, and the central government quickly changing strategies like changing the Satgas into their model of a more government control team combining the economic and health interest. So in this situation now, where people are trying to help themselves and trying also, and no other choice than to then to trust the government also, how do you see the dynamics between state and society, which could lead to a better public health system? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ole. I have a question. Where in your reflections is the scientist? Yes. In particular in Indonesian context. Well, not only Indonesia, but I can reflect from the Indonesian context that it's nowhere basically when in terms of decision making by the government. In our informal discussion yesterday, you mentioned that everything has to be based on science, right? Based on knowledge-based, research-based, and everything. But it is not really the case here in Indonesia. But I was just curious if you can also reflect from other more similar or perhaps different, totally different contexts. Thank you.
Okay, I think I have it. I begin with this question about advocating gender equality without challenging the men. I think that's impossible. You have to challenge them. But there are different ways of doing it, of course. I'm not in favor of a kind of, Me Too movement where it's kind of avoiding the efforts at rule of law so that you turn into a kind of public bullying, in the public sphere, kind of, and in the informal public sphere, bullying people. It must be reasonably regulated. There must be combined with struggles for firm regulations of with regard to sexual harassment and that kind of thing, so that people can be brought to, if not formal trial, so at least some kind of hearings in a regulated matter way. The kind of witch hunting tendencies, of course, because we don't trust the rules and regulations, the law when it comes to gender relations, when it comes to sexual harassment and these kind of things. But I don't think that the best way of addressing that would be to go out and kind of more or less beat up the men in the public square. It has to be handled in a way which is how shall we say, civilized, and where people are given a chance to have their say. But generally speaking, I think in this, if I go back in history in Scandinavia, I think the main thing has been that the women's organizations have constantly challenged the male dominance, but also constantly tried to argue that gender equality, women's rights, women's this and that, is not just for the sake of women themselves. It's good for others as well. Kindergartens are good, not just for women, it's good for the kids, it's good for production, it's good for the men as well, it's good for the grandpa and grandma who can't take care of the kids all the time, and so on, right? So for all these, because of all these reforms, you need to argue that it's not just for your own sake. The same goes for welfare reforms. We need to identify those reforms that can improve production and development for the society, so that the reforms are not made costs, but investments in a better society. So, in Scandinavia, we have even found out that coffee breaks, comes from Luki actually. He discovered something on YouTube and he sent to me. I don't normally follow YouTube, but that was a good piece where coffee breaks it's the right of laborers to have and employees to have coffee breaks at 10 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, sort of 10-15 minutes break. And that is, when one looks at it from an economic point of view, it's very much an investment, even though those times are lost, sort of, these 15 minutes. But people get breaks, people can talk to each other, people enjoy getting to the workplaces, and so on and so forth, and makes a much better job by doing that. So we need to in this way, we need to, all welfare reforms are not of that kind. And all kinds of gender equality arguments may not be actually, I'm not supportive of all of them, because I do think that they may be, there are certain demands put forward by women's organizations that I'm not necessarily supportive of. But one needs to identify at least those many reforms and arguments and so on, which are good for the society, for all of us. So that is the combine that by challenging them. That I think is the answer to it. And of course, don't take the battle in your own private life only. It has to be brought outside the bedroom kind of thing. Okay. The question about COVID-19 and the local initiatives and so on. Confessedly, I haven't been able to follow it due to the COVID-19 to a large extent. Of course, I've read about it, but I don't have an informed. You know much better than I do what was going on and the problems related to it. But I could perhaps make a few comparative reflections on the experiences here. The first thing is that even in a supposedly very well organized country like Sweden, where we had a very comparatively, again, supposedly well-functioning welfare state and public health and all of that, our main problems were coordination and the new public management leadership of the public health sector and the house for the elderly and so on. So, the central, regional, and local administration were poorly integrated, and there were no clear division of labor and responsibilities. There were even unclear systems of accountability. That's one thing. The second thing was that this kind of new public management meant that you have you borrow from the economic sector, where you cut down on costs by having so-called lean production. That means that you don't store things, you don't keep reserve storage of various important things. Everything is supposed to be delivered on time. Okay, so we didn't have any storage of these kind of things in Sweden. We didn't have any equipment. We didn't have sufficient medicine stored because we are used to get things quickly like this, right? When when we ordered it. And that broke down. So it couldn't be handled. If you take another case, and of course, there were private interests and poor people working in the houses for the elderly were often poorly paid and didn't have good work relations. So they went to work. They went to their workplaces even if they had what they thought was a cold, but it was the first part of a COVID infection. Because they couldn't stay home because they didn't have, they had very insecure work relations. And so you see, this spreads a lot. Now, local and central initiatives. Let me take my case of Kerala again in Southwest India. They did very well because there were coordination at the local level, the local authorities between civil society organizations and the local administration. They had facilitated democratic decentralization since the mid-1990s. So that, even though there are problems and imperfections and whatnot, that cooperation was possible to restart and initiate and foster. So, for instance, people who had to, there were instructions: if you can, please keep at home, and there must be quarantine here for people, and so on and so forth. That's easy to say to people. That's easy to say, but if you are in the informal sector and you live on the public marketplace every day and need to go there to get your livelihood and all of that, it's quite impossible, right? And it's easy to say to migrant laborers who are thrown out of their workplaces, and you know what the situation was in India. I mean, millions of migrant laborers were out in the streets, were out walking, trying to walk back from the cities to their villages and so on. They weren't even given public transportation, and many of them didn't get any treatment. There were people dying outside the hospitals, and the cremation sites were you know, couldn't handle the situation. You had nothing of that in Kerala, because there were local cooperatives helping the local governments to provide food for those who were asked to stay in quarantine, women's cooperatives usually, and so this cooperation worked. There was state guide. I mean, the state of Kerala, the inside India, provided support for all the migrant laborers returning to Kerala. There were huge numbers of migrant laborers that returned from the Gulf countries and from North India and other places. And there were attempts at helping them and to get into society without spreading COVID-19. And then, when this, of course, was insufficient to control COVID-19, after some time, you can't have a zero tolerance policy like they still think they can in China. It's impossible with Omicron and so on. Then you'll have to have state level programs, welfare programs to help people to virtually survive. Because this is not just a medical issue. This is an issue of livelihood for so many people, and that was provided in Kerala in a reasonable way, and that's why they won. The left front in Kerala made a landslide victories in the elections, local and central elections in the state of Kerala, and the Hindu fundamentalists didn't have a chance. So that worked. Now, in my understanding, what the situation here is much less well organized, if I put it that way. So you have a number of local initiatives, and you have a central government that is trying to regulate and do this and do that, but don't really reach out in in a reasonably efficient way to these local initiatives. I can't say more than that. So I think the Kerala example proves the case of how it is possible. But exactly what went wrong here is beyond my capacity to. No, really very, very harsh situation, but could be even worse, but you know, quite poor. But if you want to have the good cases, you will probably have to go to Taiwan, and to some extent Vietnam and Kerala. New Zealand was just the dream of saying we have an island, we keep here. But I think that's where you are. Okay, where are the scientists? Where are the academicians? Because not just scientists, right? You know, experts and all. Yeah, call it that. But there is a public discourse in Indonesia, but the question is then, how are these people recruited into public policy making and so on? Well, in my understanding, this is arbitrary. I mean, it's made by way of contacts. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the impression that I've got from working here. I'm not studied it, but you know, I've experienced how it works at UGM, for instance, how Pratikno is recruiting people from UGM, and how they are relating to others, and so on and so forth. Just as an example, in my own country, there are of course elements of this as well, but in the system of public commissions that we have had, which have come down, I'm afraid, but the public commissions to prepare legislation and so on, come forward. Let's say you need a new law on sexual harassment, say. Then the at least the ideal old tradition would be to have an expert commission. A public commission. If it was a really serious question, there would be representatives from the political parties and from major organizations. And those organizations would send their own representatives. They wouldn't be picked by from top down. Yes, selection of the kind of interest organizations, but that would also be subject to debate if it was abused. And then there would be, you know, experts called upon as well. And to bring up, to make updates of the state of knowledge in that field. What do we know from Finland, Denmark, Norway, the US, blah, blah, blah. That's the role of the experts, to review the knowledge. Yeah. That is the old system. Then it has deteriorated in many ways, because in many cases the employers stay out of this kind of cooperation, this kind of representation. They prefer lobbying, they prefer go to their representative. So then that has meant that, and then the neoliberal argument has been that this is creating, you know, disturbances in the liberal system. So individuals are being, their possibilities as active citizens of lobbying and making their way through it is reduced by this. And there may be all kinds of special interests that are promoted. Yes, there are problems, but it's even worse with lobbying, right? So, but that is there. So, and then of course, through hearings and public discourse. But the importance of social media in this respect is not always positive, right? So we come into a situation. Am I too lengthy? No. We come into a situation where anyone can say anything, and then there are sort of postmodern kind of constructivists around saying that, you know, nothing is true. There aren't anything like facts. So it's just about, you can, this is my view of things, and it's just as good as anyone else's. And yeah, that is undermining the, how should we say, the trust in expertise, in academicians, in the expert community kind of thing. I'm not saying that we are always right and that sort of thing, but we, at least the basic argument must be that whatever we say shall be able to substantiate, and anyone shall be able to control it and discuss it and so on and so forth. Right? That's the kind of basic thing about that. But if anything, everything can be said, everything can be spoken up, and if people even, and some academicians even argue that there isn't anything like coming as close as possible to some kind of truth or some kind of as best possible understanding of things, because everything is formed by our by language, by our opinions, and blah blah blah. Then this kind of postmodernism is undermining everything. And I think Indonesia is a remarkable postmodernist country in that respect. All kinds of truths are sort of just projected like that, thrown out. You know, history is rewritten, and there isn't anything to control it and debate it. But I don't think that you can prohibit things here. You can't get out and have a government control and say, no, they are wrong, they are right. I mean, that doesn't work. But it's very, so there must be an intense, there must the sort of responsible edited journalism, the principle of responsible edited journalism that was there, where Jakarta Post has a responsible editor. You can't just publish anything there, because you can, because not just because he selects what is possible to publish, but also because there is a basic responsibility for not just falsify history or accusing people of things they are not, which is beyond any basis for the arguments and so on. So the self-controlled system that was built up by media is getting seriously undermined, and it has to be restored somehow. But if governments are just coming forward with prohibitions and stiff control of things, rather than, you know, trying to reinvigorate the kind of system we had with responsible media, with responsible chief editors and so on and so forth, then I think we are in a very serious situation. And the same holds true for academicians and for us. We'll have to have some kind of self-regulation of ourselves and what we are doing, and the principles, and then of course demand that the calling of experts for this and that should also be accountable. I mean, the selection of people, just like you appoint representations from trade union and so on. It should be done from below, and when you recruit experts, it should be transparent. Good arguments for it. Just as when we sit in our faculties and select what we deem to be the best candidates, something of that kind need to be argued for. As part of this consultation, as part of, but it's a real uphill struggle, I'm afraid, but crucial, because no, I can throw garbage on social media forever. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Masih ada yang ingin bertanya? Kawan-kawan sudah cukup? Mbak Reva yang dari online ada yang mau bertanya nggak? Gimana ya? Yang belakang? Kang Danis? Oke. There is no more questions. So we wrap up the session. Oke. Ya, karena tidak ada lagi yang mau ditanyakan, saya coba untuk merangkum beberapa jawaban yang diberikan oleh Olle pada sesi tanya jawab barusan, dan ada setidaknya 2 poin yang menurut saya penting. Yang pertama adalah relasi dari masyarakat dan negara adalah relasi yang dinamis. Tetapi ya, kita tidak bisa sepenuhnya menggunakan framework liberal demokrasi yang mengasumsikan bahwa setiap orang memiliki kebebasan, memiliki kapasitas untuk berinteraksi dengan negara. Karena pada kenyataannya individu tidak sama. Ya. Ada yang memiliki resources yang lebih banyak, ada yang memiliki koneksi, ada yang memiliki tingkat pendidikan yang lebih baik, yang mana menentukan bahwa yang bersangkutan bisa memiliki pengaruh lebih dibandingkan warga yang lainnya. Oleh karenanya, Olle menyarankan untuk menciptakan kondisi relasi yang baik dan untuk mentransformasikan negara, dibutuhkan apa yang disebut sebagai membuat organisasi masyarakat yang secara kolektif bisa mengorganisir dirinya dan kemudian bisa membuat apa yang disebut system of collective competition. Ya. Jadi tidak melalui lobby individual yang mempunyai hubungan atau relasi dan kedekatan, tapi melalui satu bentuk lembaga kolektif, ya, organisasi. Ini semua menurut dia tidak ada shortcut, tidak ada jalan pintas untuk membuat relasi antara negara dan masyarakat menjadi lebih kuat, lebih baik, dan lebih sehat, di mana kita harus membuat ya, kolektif organized opposition. Dan poin kedua yang penting adalah dengan menggunakan contoh-contoh di Skandinavia dan di Kerala misalkan, dia mengatakan bahwa interaksi ini bertujuan untuk satu hal, yaitu membuat trust, ya, saling percaya antara kelompok masyarakat dan negara. Ya, kita tidak bisa kemudian membiarkan jalan keluar untuk permasalahan menggunakan mekanisme pasar, ya, karena tidak semua orang mampu, ya, mempunyai daya beli, ya, hanya kelas tertentu yang mampu. Karenanya harus ada kesepakatan bersama di mana upaya untuk mentransformasi negara, upaya untuk membuat kebijakan yang lebih baik ini menguntungkan, ya, kalau tidak dibilang semuanya, menguntungkan sebagian besar dari kelompok masyarakat. Tadi contoh yang Olle berikan adalah bagaimana kemudian upaya untuk menciptakan gender equality, ya, itu jangan kemudian hanya melulu untuk kaum perempuan mendapatkan keuntungan, tapi keuntungannya juga harus dirasakan oleh yang lain. Ya. Jadi kalau saya mengambil analogi, mungkin ini seperti iklan mobil Toyota Kijang tahun 80-an. Ya, ini agak kelihatan umurnya Mbak Ayu. Toyota Kijang tahun 80-an itu iklannya sederhana. Ayah teteh, ayah AA, ayah papi, ayah mami, ayah Ua gitu kan, ayah nini gitu. Jadi ada semuanya di dalam mobil Kijang itu. Ya, jadi tidak hanya menguntungkan kelompok tertentu, tapi sebanyak mungkin kelompok bisa diuntungkan sehingga proposal untuk melakukan perubahan bisa diterima dan bisa didukung. Oke. Mari kita sudahi sesi seminar pada pagi hari ini dengan memberikan tepuk tangan yang meriah untuk Profesor Olle Tornquist. Thank you very much, Olle, for your presentation. Dan juga terima kasih untuk Mbak Reva, Mas Saiful, dan mas-mas yang mempersiapkan equipment untuk keberlangsungan acara pada pagi sampai siang hari ini. Okay. Besok akan ada peluncuran bukunya Olle.